Hey everybody, welcome to the In All Things podcast. It's time to see God in everything.
All right, well, hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the In All Things podcast. My name is Steve Markle. I'm the lead pastor and the host of today's special Valentine's episode. And I have with me my wife, Sherri Markle. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. This is a first for us.
Yeah, it is.
In all our years, we've never done anything like this.
No, we've done sermons on the stage together, but we've never done this. This is our first podcast here without Mitch. So he's done one without me, and now I am doing one, hosting one for the first time without him. So who's more nervous, me or you?
Oh, for sure, it would have to be me.
Okay. Yeah.
I think a little out of my comfort zone.
This is going to be fun. Okay. It's Valentine's week, and so this was Mitch's idea that you and I do a podcast together and talk about relationships, and which is kind of coincidentally the thing we're doing on Sunday mornings.
Right.
We're in a series called Peopleology, and we're not going to talk a lot about that, but your impressions, anything from the first 2 weeks that you've seen or that you've liked?
Oh, the series is great. I've been thinking a lot, even since last week, about the circles of influence talked about last week. That's just been a big concept for being intentional about that. And I've heard a lot of other people talking about it too. And then today, coming into the He Would Love First, I thought that was just great. One of the things that really stood out to me that you said today was about keeping a record, and releasing is not easy, but it's freeing. That was just something that really stood out to me today.
Yeah. I was thinking of you last week when I was planning the word intentional, because that's the thing you say a lot. And sometimes the things that you say get in my head, and you may not realize that, but the idea of being intentional about it. And so when we're talking today about relationships, our relationship, and about being intentional, so important in your romantic relationships, whether you're married, whether you're dating, whether you're engaged, whether you're single, and you hope to one day be married, you got to be intentional about what you do to get the best out of relationships. So we're going to kind of dive in and have a Valentine's week conversation. So why don't we, I think it could be interesting for people to know, talk a little bit about our history. We've been married this summer 32 years.
32, yes.
And how many years did we date before that?
6 years before that.
6 years before that. So we got married when we were 20. You were 19. Yes. And
we say high school sweethearts, but really it was the end of 8th grade.
End of 8th grade.
We started going together.
So that was in May of 8th grade. And so our first Valentine's Day would have been as freshmen in high school.
Correct.
So do you remember what I did, if I did anything for you that day?
I do remember there used to be, and I think they still do it sometimes in schools, where you can do like a little purchase of a Valentine that's delivered during the school day. So I do remember something about that, where there was like a flower with a heart attached that had a little message to it. And I think I still have that little heart in our little scrapbook,
maybe
actually.
You do. You're better about that stuff than I am. But I do
remember that?
I do remember we were at a Christian school, so it was smaller, and I think it was a senior class fundraiser where you could pay $10. Yeah. Now, I remember that I not only bought the flower, but they did a singing telegram. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So some high school senior guys came in and sang to you from me. Do you remember the song?
You Are My Sunshine.
Yes, it was You Are My Sunshine. Yes.
Wow.
You make me happy when skies are gray.
That's a blast from the past. Oh my goodness.
I didn't know if you'd remember that or not, but now that I said it. So candy or flowers, preference?
Honey, I'm still stuck on that memory now.
You can picture the classroom, right?
I can now.
All right.
Wow.
Candy or flowers, what do you prefer? Or something else?
Although it's not in the healthy eating plan, the candy and, the chocolate, it just can't beat the chocolate.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
So here's like an obvious question probably, but what matters more? Being awesome as a boyfriend or husband on Valentine's Day, or just being consistently good all year round?
Well, consistently good for sure, but that doesn't mean you can forget the important events either.
So for good year round, that doesn't give us a pass for Valentine's Day.
Yeah, but if you're good year round, you're not going to miss those days either, right?
Right. But it's not all about those days.
It's not. It's
so by
not
the time,
just about that event.
So by the time this podcast comes out, it will be a couple of days after Valentine's Day. So some guys maybe have already failed by then. So what should they do? Should they try to make up for it?
They should.
They should.
Yes, they need to acknowledge it and make it right. Yes.
Yeah. I haven't always been perfect on that, but one thing that, when it comes to flowers and chocolate, what you've always said is it's the thought that counts more than the amount you spend, right? Because when you spend the money, it's coming out of our account, especially. So when you're dating, it's one thing, but
it's
when
not really
you're married,
in the budget. Yes.
When you're married, if you're going to go and if you want to spend, $100 on flowers, you can. But you're just like, it's just as good if you go to Kroger and spend $10 on the flowers there, right?
To me, yes.
And you also would say those are good, not just
I would say, yes, there you go.
Yeah.
See, you've learned.
I've
That's
learned.
Good.
Just don't always
all
do
those
it.
special times.
Yes. All right. So this summer, as I said, in August, we'll hit 32 years.
Right.
When you hear the number 32 years married, how does that hit you? What does it make you feel?
Wow. I mean, for one, that equates to an age, which is sometimes hard to think about, but so much. We've just had so much in our lives. So many years. I think I'm just flooded with memories.
Right.
When you say that number.
32, I used to think is a lot. I mean, it's still a lot. But when I was younger, people that are married 32 years are old. And we're not old because we got married young. So I feel like we're halfway, maybe. That would give us 64 years of marriage. That would put us at 84. That's not unreachable.
All right.
Yeah, so I think you're halfway at the halfway point. And I think that's a really good way to look at it. The word blessed comes to my mind a lot to think about all the blessings. A lot of people, kind of scoffed when we were getting married so young, like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. Marriages that are, when you get married that young, they don't turn out well. I don't buy into that. I don't think that's necessarily true. There's a lot of other factors that play into that. But 32 years. Now, you may not. This is a hard on-the-spot question. Anything that is some embarrassing or funny story from a marriage you think people would like to hear?
Oh, goodness. That is a good question. Something may come to mind.
Okay.
But,
No, that was I knew it was
on the spot.
A risky one to ask on the
tough.
spot. You probably block some things out of your mind.
I think that is a factor because I tend to not want to dwell on any of those things. I'd rather forget some of those things maybe, just because of maybe it's pride or maybe it's just to be able to move on from them. It's,
right.
Because it was embarrassing or for whatever reason. Maybe that's why.
Well, as we talked about this, no, not really. I mean, I think we learn to laugh at a lot of the moments that we have and there's funny things that happen along the way because you don't know stuff and it's, I
just think of it as a journey. It's a part of the journey. And so there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be all kinds of things that happen. So I'd have to really focus probably my mind to try to think of what some of those are.
Right. Now, I did clue you in on a little bit of what we might talk about and not to, catch you all by surprise. Now, I know Mitch likes to do that to me.
Yes.
But you're not in the off-the-cuff type of thing.
I am
as
not.
much.
You know that about me. That is not my strong suit. Just off the top of my head, I like to marinate on questions.
So one of the things that I told you we would talk about a little bit is that we're entering our, this sounds crazy, 4th decade of marriage. Wow. So we had the first 10 years, second 10 years, third 10 years. And for us, it kind of can look at it as our 20s, our 30s, and our 40s. Now that we just hit 50, we can look at those. And I was like, which of those decades do you think was your favorite? Like your 20s, your 30s, or your 40s? Ours together as our first, second, or third decade of marriage so far. We're in our 4th. I know our 4th is going to be the best, but what?
I don't know. I have a hard time saying favorite because there were so many good things in each one, as well as challenges, of course.
Right.
I mean, you've got your first decade where you just get married. Of course, that's, all your firsts.
Yes. I mean, I would say
all of our first, our first place we lived, our first child, all of that. So
I think the 20s was a lot of fun. We set up in our first apartment and we didn't know what we were doing. 20 and 19 years old, I think about it and it's like, that's crazy. And we didn't live close to our families. We were 5 hours away from our families in college and in an apartment and not knowing what we were doing. But it was an adventure. I remember, do you remember our first apartment was $270 a month and we were on a tight budget and it was a 2-bedroom apartment. And then after our first year, it was a basement apartment in somebody's house and they were nice and we liked it. But they said, we are raising your rent to $285 from $270. And I was like, we're out. Wow. We cannot.
That's like
we can't
multiple meals. That
was like how many spaghetti meals would that be? And like we couldn't afford that. And then ironically, we moved to an apartment that was $325 a month, but it was close to the church we were part of, and it was a better apartment.
Justified it.
We justified
totally,
it, you know, pick up another shift at the place we work. So that was a fun time, getting married in school, getting our first jobs out of school. I became a youth pastor. You were working for Liberty University in the registrar's office, right?
I was, yes.
Yeah, and so we started that, and then we're 23 and our first kid.
Right.
Yes. So that was pretty exciting.
That was very exciting.
Yeah.
Yes. I always wanted to be a mom. I mean, that was just my dream all growing up.
Yeah, you were the oldest of 5, so you did a lot of caretaking of the younger siblings. And so, I mean, it fits you perfectly. Obviously you were a great mom when they were young and still are a great mom now that you have grandchildren, but we'll get to that in a moment. But so those first 10 years, the downsides of the 20s, not very much money.
That would be my first thought. Yes.
Right?
Limited budget, very limited.
I mean, like I was joking about spaghetti, but like you taught me when we first got married to make spaghetti
I was afraid this one
that
would
you don't
come
have
up.
to have meat in spaghetti. I thought it had, I grew up with either ground beef or meatballs. And you're like, you made it for us the first time. Like, where's the beef? Like, where's the beef?
Yes.
And so that was our first marital issue in our first week in our new apartment. But then now I know, like, you don't have to have meat and spaghetti. It's okay, right?
But then you have to have other sides or something.
Just don't try.
I've realized, yes.
Recently you tried to slide by the gluten-free spaghetti noodles.
Yeah, that's a whole
not
different
happening.
topic.
Those are gross. But anyway, we're not doing that. They're disgusking.
We'll revisit that at another time.
We won't. But anyway, less money, but it was exciting. We was talking about it. We've lived in 11 different homes. Residences,
counting apartments,
like first apartment, second apartment, and then we had a first townhouse, house, and so we counted up in 32 years, 11 different residences. We've slowed down the pace, but one every 3 years, that's a lot of stress too, but a lot of exciting new houses.
And it wasn't every 3 years, somewhere longer, but, it just
averaging it out. So that was the 20s, and we had 3 kids in our 20s, right?
Yes.
Lexi was 30, 29-ish.
Within
that
first
10 years. All right. So
leading into the next decade.
And that was what we thought we were going to do, have them all in their first, and then, Anyway, in their 30s, it got a little harder, didn't it?
More challenging for sure. I mean, the kids are growing up. They had their school activities, their sports activities. I mean, church planning came in at that time.
Yeah,
that was a huge part of our lives.
Yeah.
So it's more the logistics time, I think. And I see young families now and with kids in those ages, and that's just such the challenge of that time. It's exciting having all those things going on, but we're both working.
Yes. I mean, I remember, so my first 10 years of youth pastor was kind of like coinciding with the 20s. And then at 31 is when I felt God leading me to be a lead pastor. And then we agreed together to plant a church with 20 people. And Lexi was a baby. She was like a year old when we planted the church. And so we had a 1-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And that was stressful financially because didn't know how that was all going to work out. A lot of pressure on you.
It took a lot of faith.
It took a lot of faith. And also I think it was probably our most challenging years for us because I was super stressed about the church plant and focused on that a lot. Not to the point that I ignored you, but probably didn't give you the attention that you needed at that time.
I was engaged in as much as possible in that whole process and tried to support as much as possible. But I also had the biggest responsibility with the children because you are so focused on that.
Yes.
And I probably gave you a lot more leeway, maybe than I even should have. I don't know. It's hard to say.
I know that later you've told me.
But I never wanted to hinder anything that you were doing.
Yes. You were a great example of what we talked about this morning of putting others first. And you didn't selfishly tell me how you were feeling all the time because you didn't want it to be a thing that bogged me down. But I know looking back that was really hard on you. The church planning thing is hard. And they actually did a lot of assessing of us before, and they knew that we could handle it because of your support of me. But I look back, and those were hard years. There was times when it was easier than others, but there were times when it was very difficult. In the beginning, we got to the church to the point where it was stable and it wasn't like stressful every week, about all of that. But the kids are getting older. everybody doesn't know. When your kids are young, you think it's expensive getting diapers and all that, and it is. But then the expenses just change as they get older. And if you decide, like us, to have more than one, just multiply it out on what it costs. And they start getting involved in more with school.
Right.
And it's a lot.
It's a lot to manage, for sure.
When your confidence grows, you start to be able to handle more.
But you're spread thin.
You are. And the relationship is like at a level where it's comfortable after 10 years. Like, okay. And a lot of couples, when they fall apart, it's in that second 10 years.
I would say there's pros and cons to that comfort too, because you're so focused on the logistics of things that you don't really have any special time left over for each other, or energy a lot of times left over.
And,
and you can get too comfortable.
And we didn't invest enough in those time periods, I would say. And the reason we're doing this is because I look at our church, and there's a lot of couples that are in their first 10 years, in their 20s or whatever age they get married. Then there's a lot in their second 10 years with the young kids, and then there's ones that are in their third decade, I should say, and their kids are teenagers, and then there's beyond. And I think that the struggles change as you get older, and the challenges change. And like we talked about money, like we had a little bit more in the 30s, not much though, because I was church planning, and I mean, you were working, but one of the things that we always say, have a date night. Well, we couldn't afford a date night. I mean, like 3 kids that you have to pay for childcare and then spend money to go out. And we didn't have our family living where we could just, hey, grandma and granddad, come watch the kids so we can go out. So we didn't do enough of that. And we had our excuses on why. And sometimes we, had somebody a friend that would just say, hey, I'll watch
you can switch with a friend and all, but then that's another night you have to plan because you have to return the
busy,
favor.
And it's just a lot. So it was a challenging decade. I think that was the most challenging of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, so to speak.
Reminded of that when I see young families around church, especially, and just chasing each other down, trying to get from the class out to the car. And I'm just flooded with memories of that.
Well, and another element of that too is that you're always like a single parent.
I was always by myself then.
You're a single parent on Sundays. I mean, pretty much, I am not available, and it's a hard thing to learn. And I wouldn't tell guys and gals going into ministry like you need to accept that a little bit. I've seen struggles where maybe the spouse doesn't understand that as much. And like you have to understand they're on their job, and you've always, I don't ignore my kids on Sunday at church or my family, but
it's a reality.
It's a reality. And so going to church was usually a solo effort for you on Sunday morning, and you're expected to be the pastor's wife or the youth pastor's wife. And there's a lot of challenges in that.
I know you've talked about that whole fishbowl mentality. That was another podcast that you did.
Yes. So yeah. And then, so our 40s, things changed a little bit. Right at the beginning of that, we have another child that God said, hey, 3 isn't enough. You need 4. So we would be right now in a total different phase of life if God hadn't done that. We're so thankful that he did. We are so thankful for Nick and that we have a 13-year-old at home, even though our kids are older, the rest of them. It has been really fun. We're now the old parents when we're around his friends' parents.
Right.
He does have a few that we relate to because they're like our age, but most of his, and I've coached baseball, and most of the kids on the team, their parents are younger. I'm the old guy, but that's okay. I'm experienced. I have wisdom, all that kind of stuff.
Yes,
but so in our 40s, things changed too because we moved to Ohio.
Right. Lots of things happened.
A lot did. Yeah.
Yeah, a busy decade if we're looking at it that way.
Yeah, like when I was 41, you were 40 when we moved here to Ohio 11 years ago. And at that time, what are you going to say? Go ahead.
Right. Our oldest went to college.
Yes. So our oldest son, Zach.
Huge life event.
Right. So he graduated, and literally in August, we drove him to Liberty in Lynchburg, Virginia, and then we moved like the same day. We dropped him off and drove to Ohio, 6 hours away. Instead of being 3 hours away from us, he's 6 hours away. I'm starting a new job at a church, Sycamore Creek Church, which, we had been in Northern Virginia for 16 years, 10 as a youth pastor, 10 as a church planner, 6 as a youth pastor before that. Right. And Northern Virginia was, I would say, a great experience for us, but everybody that came through our church came through it. They were usually military, and every 3 years or 2 years, they're moving, government workers. And so very few people stayed there. So even though I felt committed to this church plant, we were in a school, 26-foot trailer, setting up and tearing down, looked for property. I mean, we tried, couldn't find anything even close to affordable. So it was kind of like always, God, if you want us to be somewhere else for the rest of our lives, we're open to that. And at 40, you're like coming into your prime.
It was taking a toll on us.
It was hard.
It was a strain.
There was no
sure.
end in sight of the way
and we were
it was.
there because God called us to be there.
Absolutely.
And we were serving faithfully and would stay if that's where He wanted us to be.
Yeah. And the great thing about Sycamore Creek,
open,
it wasn't me looking desperately to go somewhere. It was a door that got opened, and we walked through that door, and it was the beginning of a good journey. It was hard at first.
The timing, yes.
I mean,
we already mentioned that.
Oldest,
college,
and then coming here, and then the learning curve of. We've been mid-Eastern people. Maryland is where we were born, grew up.
Change.
Virginia, that's it. And then Midwest a little bit. Ohio is different. And Pickerington, awesome. We love it here. Beginning, first year or two, it was like, a lot of times people say, well, you know that. I was like, no, we don't know that.
There were a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, a lot of assumptions. The easiest thing was to become a Buckeye fan because they're good. And I love
we
football,
get on board
so
with
that was easy.
Quickly.
But learning the way of life here. But we wanted to be in an area like this where it'd be great for our family. And it has turned out to be a perfect fit for us to be here at this church.
But that was just the beginning, really, of all the major life changes that have happened in this last 10 years.
Right. And this last 10 years has been like...
had other kids go to college.
Yes.
Our girls have gone to college.
Yeah, 3 kids
All
go to college.
3 have gotten married.
3 kids got married. 3 kids went to college.
Yes.
3 kids graduated from college.
And in addition to that, our parents have gotten older. The loss of my dad.
Yes. Yeah, that was like 4 years ago now that your dad passed away. And then my parents and my grandmother moved here. We moved, like 2 or 3 years after we moved here, we talked them into moving to Ohio. So it's been a whirlwind and a lot of things, but one of the good things for us, and especially in the last couple years, so maybe now we're talking about our 4th decade, is that we are a little bit...
I just got to process that first.
Yeah, I know. You start thinking about what we're able to do now is be more intentional about our trips, about doing things, like not expensive things, but just going away for 2 or 3 nights to a city that we can drive to that they haven't been to before, taking in a show or a sporting event. And
so back to your question, not to interrupt you, but back to your question when you said what's the best for us.
Yes.
This season in that way is because we have, even though we still have one at home, and now we also have grandkids and, a lot more busyness going on because they also came, in recent years, added grandkids to the family. But for us to be able to just get away, it's, we have a little bit more financial ability to be able to do that.
Yes.
And coordinating that with just having care for Nick is a little bit easier.
That's right.
So
you have
in that way, it's better.
Yes, you have a great job. And so things are, down to only one left that we have to pay for college. And we already paid for 2 weddings. So we're out of that game now. So we're getting to that. For some people listening, 32 years seems like, wow, that's like so long. And there's people listening that have been married longer than that. But what are some of the keys, do you think, that there are to being married that long? I just have to share this. I opened up this Google Doc, and I use a Google Doc for this because I wanted Mitch to edit it. And he did edit some, and he cut a few things. And then right after this question, what are some keys to being married a long time? In parentheses, in red, I didn't write this, and the word is sex. So I don't know if he wants us to talk about it or just to acknowledge that.
That is an important factor, yes.
Yeah, that is an important factor in being married a long time. We're not going to talk about that, except that, that's something that
could be a whole nother.
Yeah, you need to do that if you're married, and do it as much as possible. But anyway, I have parents that have been married 53 years, and both my grandparents, they were married over 60 years. Both sets of my grandparents. So it's
such a legacy.
It's a legacy. It's a heritage. It's awesome. Great examples for us. So as you're thinking about it, is there some keys that jump out to you right away? That anything? Maybe you wrote something down about this?
I did think ahead on this because I had a feeling, that kind of question would be coming. So I did try to put some thought into that. Some keys. Just to start off with, like you mentioned, at the top of the podcast, being intentional. I do use that word. It's a really important word for me.
Yes.
Because I want to make sure that my thoughts, my words, my actions, I'm really thinking through those. I think that has a major effect on our relationship, on any relationship, but in marriage, it's so important just to think before you speak about how the other person's going to receive what you're saying, maybe different choice of words. I think that's
I think that's
so
something
important.
that
You can't take your words back.
No, you've tried to impart that to me, and I think I was thinking about it even this morning during worship, of thinking about some things that, even with each other, I think things that maybe used to get on each other's nerves, now we just look at them as just little quirks or cute things about the other person. They just accept and love, and don't criticize.
Give each other some grace.
Yes, exactly.
And the older you get, I think that becomes even more important as you deal with health issues, different things that have gone on. I know we've had some things in the last couple of years that have made it more challenging.
Sure.
So I think that's really important. But another big key that I've always tried to apply for myself is to never speak poorly of you, to other people in that way. Now, you may need wise counsel. There may be people that I have to counsel on sometimes if I'm struggling with something.
Right.
But I'm not going to speak poorly of you to someone else. I want to be your biggest encourager, biggest supporter, and I want people to know that that's what I'm going to be.
Yeah, there's a lot, and I've always felt that, and there's a lot of bashing that can go on when women can get together and bash their husbands, and sometimes it's joking, but sometimes it's reality. And like you said, you should have a close friend that you can talk to about me, because I can be a lot sometimes. But that should never be someone that doesn't love me too. That doesn't, you know what I mean? Want the best for me and you.
There's an appropriate way to go about that.
Right. Obviously, it's not somebody of the opposite sex, but
correct.
Confiding.
And there's a select few. Back to that circles of influence. There's
it would be somebody
private,
in that circle,
dealing with things privately.
Right.
But for the most part, when there's an issue, we're going to talk about it privately ourselves. A lot of times there doesn't even need to be another person involved.
Correct.
Like you've talked about it today, having your own heart right in your relationships. If your own heart is right, that's going to be a huge factor in the way that you relate to each other.
Right.
So dealing with things privately would be another key, I would say.
Privately, for sure. Yeah. Today's message, I hit on 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, and talked about love being patient and kind and not demanding your own way, forgiving. All those things are so important for marriage. We've talked about them a good bit.
I was thinking about that a lot as you were talking, things that were applicable. Knowing that we were going to be meeting this afternoon for this, but also just in general, because it's the most important relationship for me, for us.
Right. Oh, absolutely. If this isn't right, it makes everything else more difficult to do. Because there's so much stress in life that comes in different ways, shapes, and form. Family stresses. There's so much. And one of the things I thought was a good thing to say is that you need to have realistic expectations for each other during difficult seasons. Like you talked about in our 30s about, when I was planning a church, and you were doing that with me, but expectations, you kind of lowered a little bit on me at times to be more patient. Somebody came by Guest Central after the service and was talking, I don't think they were talking to both of us.
Yes.
They were talking about the percentages. Like it's not 50-50. Like there's going to be times, I know everybody should put in 100. I'm not talking about that. But who is giving and who's taking? Sometimes it's 60-40. Sometimes you're giving 70% and I'm only giving 30. That can't continue consistently. It has to balance out. But there's just going to be times like that. And we have to learn to be the one that's giving more than taking sometimes.
And sometimes that's an action, a task that needs to be accomplished at home, a chore, per se. And sometimes it's just the grace and the understanding and the encouragement, verbally or physically that the other person needs.
We talked a little bit about some of the struggles, but I think sometimes people can look at me and you and our lives and just be like, oh man, they have the easiest, blessed, best life and they never have any problems. And it's like, no, we just don't put them all out there for everybody to know. But through our years, we've been through some difficult drama and church-related things with people, family-related issues. You went through an ectopic pregnancy that was very difficult. Financial challenges. Any others that you think of off the top of your head?
More recent years, I've had surgeries that I've had to go through, and I had thyroid issues.
Thyroid removed.
Even last fall, I fell and had a concussion. There's just things like that really set you back. and you just have to be there for each other in the moment and be willing to be that.
I mean, everybody has stuff, like they say, everybody has things, and it hasn't been this like easy 32-year ride. They love each other so much, and it's just the easy. No, there's times when it was hard to love me, and maybe,
I will say, I mean, another thing for being intentional is I'm committed, Proverbs 31. If you, for women, just go and read that. Virtuous Woman, it's very valuable to focus on that and read it frequently and remind yourself who God calls us to be. But also just, I try to remind myself often why we fell in love in the first place.
Right.
All those things and how we've evolved together and, grown up together in a lot of ways and, in our adult lives. And I think that's really important to reflect on that yourself, just personally. At times, just to remind yourself, don't let your thoughts run the wrong direction.
Right.
Capture them, control them. It's really important. One thing that does really keep me in check, and I've shared this with, other friends and all too, is being a parent. And if you're a parent, maybe this will be applicable to you, but it's, when you think of your children and the kind of marriages you want them to have, your sons, your daughters, what kind of spouse you want them to be, what kind of marriage you want them to have, and then try to model that for them so that that's what they're seeing and then can have in their life too. And that really helps keep me in check when I can get frustrated. I'm like, well, how would I want my daughter to respond to her husband? Right. How would I want my, son to treat his wife in this kind of situation? Because they're watching.
I think that's how something has changed for us in the last 10 years is that I used to be like, we got to model good marriage for everybody in our church. Now it's like, we got to model marriage for our kids. And not that we weren't always thinking that, but so we've gone from our 20s and now we're starting our 50s. We got 3 married children, 2.9 grandchildren, because Cooper is about a month away.
Almost here.
His due date is a month from today. We have 1 teenager still at home. But the fact is, I think we're in that phase starting to think about, okay, what's our legacy? So the next 32 years, it's about how are we impacting this next generation that God's given us? I think early on, we've talked about this. I made some choices in the church planning phase as a pastor that there's going to be things that I don't do that could help build the church, but instead I'm going to use that time for my family. Because some pastors just pour into the church and neglect their family. And there's been things that I've done that some people have probably criticized, and maybe the church could have been bigger if I would have done less coaching of my sons in baseball. Maybe.
I mean, we've seen too many issues with other pastors' families.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not the focus necessarily, pastor family, on this topic, just because it's a focus on marriage. But for us, it's a huge factor.
Yeah, I don't want to. I know we're not talking to people that are listening. Very few pastors are probably listening, but people, though, I want you to think about legacy. And what I'm thinking about now is like, 4 kids, what impact are they going to make on the world? Because my impact on this world, I think, and your impact is really what happens with them. And, the ones that the jobs they're doing as, analysts, as engineers, as nurses, as teachers, as student pastors, thinking about our kids and their spouses. I mean, we're so proud of them, and it's so exciting to see.
And they're all here.
They're all here. I mean, all of our kids are here, and they're involved in the church and small groups and serving, and all of that is just people. We were at a thing Friday night. So
I was just thinking about
we were
that.
at a Pastors and Wives thing with Metro Columbus Association. We so probably 80 people there in this staying overnight at the Embassy Suites here in town, and it was a fun night that they gave us. And we got to sit at a table with 3 other couples, and one was like 40s, early 40s, and then the others were in their 30s, and we were the old people there. But everybody's kind of sharing their story. And it's like 4 kids, 3 kids, and we had 4. So almost everybody must be a pastor thing. But anyway, we were just talking about, then when they're hearing our story, the ones that are in their 40s, they're thinking, that's exactly what we want. All of our kids to be there and being a part of the ministry and seeing your kids serve and want to do that. That's just like I think all the work you did, I give you the credit in the early days. It's worth it. It's paying off.
That was a special moment for me, I'll admit, when one of the other wives said that's what I dream for my family is for us all to be in church serving together and them all to be, living for the Lord and just, sharing that with others and, have good marriages. And that was, that was so affirming to
It is affirming.
That.
We're so busy and focused.
It's worth
and
it.
we're always focused forward, you and I, and we're motivated, high standards for ourselves to push ourselves to do better. Sometimes when you're like that, you don't take the time to like realize what you got. And the blessing of what we have right now, like we're living the dream. That's what they're saying. You're living our dream. Like It is a dream. And I have my parents, my grandmother here with us too, being a part of all of that. And
not that it's not a busy time, and definitely plenty of stresses.
It's not easy. I mean, you work a busy job, and you work 4 long days, Monday to Thursday, so you can have Fridays off, and I'm off on Fridays. And a lot of times those are grandson days now.
Grandson days.
And we had both of them, 2 and a 3-year-old, on Friday, and it's exhausting all day, but it's fun. It is fun, and then we give them back, and that's a good thing. And so, as we think about it, what are some? I don't know if you thought about this, but what are some of you think the biggest challenges facing young couples today? You think it's different than it was for us 30 years ago?
I think it's some similar challenges as it's always been, but I do think there are more things that compete with that. And really just the ideals. I think social media can really just have an effect on marriages.
The comparison trap.
The comparison trap. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. I mean, just for one, your time. It's a time dump a lot of times. You know, there's too many people that sit scrolling on their phones instead of with each other, or, you know, looking at what their friends are doing or what their spouses are like, you know, whether it's physical, what they look like, or what their jobs are, or the activities that they do, the trips that they go on. You can easily just fall into that and think that somebody's got it better than you, when you really should just be focusing on what you have.
You know, over the years, you and I, I've done a lot of meetings and counseling, but you always know what's going on. And every couple that I find going through an affair or getting a divorce and going with somebody else, very rarely does the next person turn out to be better than the one they left. I mean, they turn out to have the problems they had, they take them with them into the next marriage. And if you think you're in a marriage right now and it's not like what you guys have, listen, just because you can work on the one you're in. And that's always what I would say. Work on the one you're in before you think jump into another one's going to be a better deal.
And don't underestimate the ramifications either. I mean, there's a lot of consequences, you know, if you let your marriage fall apart. It affects more people than you often want to admit to yourself that it does. Right. So I would say stay the course. I mean, you can't help with this kind of a conversation. My mind is flooded with people that I know are struggling, and I just wish I could sit down with each one, and I wish they would listen. And just say, you know, like you mentioned, it hasn't been easy for us. I mean, yes, I feel very blessed. I'm so thankful, but that has taken a huge amount of action and intentionality, as we continue to use that word, to get us to this point. And there were a lot of struggles along the way that, you know, most people wouldn't know about.
Yeah. Just because my parents and my grandparents have these legacy marriages doesn't mean that we're automatically going to have that. And we have to work at it.
They had a lot of ups and downs, too.
They had ups and downs, and there are plenty of other people in our families that got divorced and went through that, and we've seen all that. So it's not like, oh, you have everybody in your family's perfect. No, we have plenty of things that we've seen and experienced like that we've been close to. So it's hard. It's a struggle. We're going to wrap this up here in a minute, but Valentine's week, it can be hard for single people. There's a lot of people that are single that want to mingle. That's a really bad one, but
wow.
I know. I'm not talking about you, buddy. I know. You're like, you had to say that. But you're over there smiling. So, because it's just a bad little rhyme. But what do you think about what they should be doing these days? If they're in that place where they want to be intentional about being in a relationship, and, you know, I don't want to put an age number on it, because there's certain people like, if I'm not married by this age, I feel like, what's wrong? Am I ever going to get married?
It doesn't mean you're less if you're not.
No, you're not.
I'm going to imply that at all.
No.
But for this discussion, of course, if that is something that you're looking for, there are avenues to connect with people that can be a good opportunity. I've known some people that have, met their mate on
Christian Mingle.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it used to be this thing where you'd make a joke about that. Now it's like a very commonplace thing, because you can weed people out quicker that wouldn't be a good fit for you.
They help vet it for you.
Yeah, right. So there's filters, all right? So not that we're here to recommend a dating website, not at all. But if you're sitting around doing nothing and hoping that one day that you'll be dating and married, that's not going to work.
I guess that's what you're implying. That's what you're trying to get to.
You have to be active about that. And but until then, just date Jesus, right? I'm sorry, that was very cliche. But no, Valentine's week.
But make sure your heart is right, is what you're trying to say.
Always say, be the right person. If you want to meet the right person, be the right person, and God will bring people in your life.
Don't stop working on
yourself. But be active and proactive about it as much as possible. So, all right, so we're going to wrap this things up, put a bow on this conversation. Any things, that you were thinking maybe, we're always looking back at in all things. How does God work in all things? And it's, God works in all things for our good. And is there any closing thoughts that you had based on any of our conversation today?
Or even the service
today? Yeah,
today.
Even the service today, sure.
I mean, my mind just continues to go back to the new song that we introduced today, I Speak Jesus. I mean, that just sums it all up.
I could tell that song was getting to you in the part that I speak Jesus over my family. It's like
so much.
You see it in such the big picture of our family is just growing and it's bigger. And I think of all the families in the church and all the young couples and those that are struggling. Yeah.
Right.
Jesus wants to work in everything. And everything you're going through in your life. And it's so easy to compartmentalize. And I heard somebody this week in my men's group said another analogy for men and women. They say men are like waffles and women are like spaghetti. Because waffles have all those boxes. And you've seen that before. And women are like spaghetti. And that's a struggle.
It all runs together.
It all runs together. But I think, God is more like spaghetti in that way. It's not because everything God should be part of it. Right. It's not like we compartmentalize and say, well, I just need to figure this out. No, God wants to help you. And so in your marriage, make sure, or in your relationship, in your dating, in your singleness, always be looking for how God is working and ask him to work through you. Be the right person.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if your marriage is struggling, reach out for help.
Yeah.
Don't let it just fail. I mean, put the effort into it. Do not give up. I see too many people that give up too soon. Yeah. Do not give up. I mean, it's not like haven't had those thoughts over this many years. Mm-hmm. There's been times when I wasn't sure we were going to make it.
Right.
But
and everybody thinks differently about those things, but don't ever assume that you're alone and that nobody thinks like you do or nobody's had those thoughts. Right. Or you're a terrible Christian for thinking any thoughts like that. No. What makes it bad is when you act on them or don't act in a way that get help. So
and then on the other side of that, I mean, be thankful for your marriage. I mean, if this is a good time for you right now, you're in a good season, things are going great, be thankful for that.
Absolutely. I mean, if nothing else, doing this exercise of this podcast has caused us to just take a few moments and stop and reflect on how blessed we are, and having other people tell us that sometimes it's almost convicting, like, wow, I don't thank God enough for the blessings.
Right. I don't want to take that for granted.
Well, thank you so much. This was awesome to have you. You're prettier than my other host, or the other person I do this with, for sure. But it's been a lot of fun. If you're listening today, please let us know if you have any thoughts about this episode, any questions, maybe something that you're wrestling with, disagree with. You can contact us. Podcast@sycamorecreek.org is our email address. If you have topics you'd like to hear us talk about, anything, you can subscribe. The various places where you listen to podcasts, you can subscribe so you automatically get notified when a new one comes up, and you can watch on YouTube as well. But we thank you, the people in the In All Things family that are watching every week or listening every week. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the In All Things podcast. Our challenge for you today is to send this episode to one person. Seriously, think of somebody right now that could use this conversation and send it to them. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic ideas, please send them to podcast@sycamorecreek.org, and make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Sycamore Creek Church so that you can always see what's going on in our world. If this conversation helped you at all, make sure you share it, leave a review, and subscribe so that you don't miss out on a single episode. We love you, God loves you, and we'll see you next week on the In All Things podcast.